Good morning. I'm Scott Forcino with Real Brokerage out of New York City. I founded PlugIntro for the purpose of training agents and giving members of the real estate community a chance to promote their business and get deeper into the local business community. I have with us an esteemed speaker, Scott Einbinder, a friend who's a forward thinker and a real national treasure, an educator, and progressive idealist. So we have an issue here. Scott, would you introduce yourself and let us know what is happening in the landscape and with
Yeah, so nice to see you, Scott. Again, I say I've been in the industry for 59 years. I'm 59 years old. I grew up in the business, so it's the only thing I've ever done. And I've had the kind of the benefit of seeing this industry evolve over the many years that I've been in it. There's been a lot of changes, and there's when I say there's been a lot of changes, not as many changes as you'd think, but we are at a point in the business where and the reason for this kind of conversation today is regarding this current litigation that's pending in the industry that could forever change the way in which real estate agents earn money and the way brokers earn money.
So, quick preview as we know the status quo, but you explain how compensation is earned in the industry right now with the agreements and the standards.
So basically, forever, the way the real estate business is run is the listing agent. There's this, the board of realtors, and I'm assuming everybody that's watching this is in the industry to a large degree. The board of realtors, in cooperation with the multiple listing service, there is this thing of cooperation amongst brokers. That's always been this architecture of the industry, cooperation amongst brokers. And when we say brokers and other companies who, if they're members of the MLS and they're members of the National Association of Realtors, they get to basically cooperate, which in essence means being able to sell and represent sellers, in selling the properties to each other, and compensation. I mean, that's what we're going to talk about today. The way the compensation has been laid out is that a listing agent has been the one to collect the revenue associated with the transaction. So if a seller wants to sell their house, they hire a listing broker or the listing agent, and that listing agent would charge a commission, whether that commission is whatever, whether it's 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, and whatever was collected by the listing agent would take a portion of that commission and offer it and share it with a buyer's agent as compensation for representing a buyer, for bringing their buyer, for handling the transaction in cooperation with the listing agent. And so forever, basically, buyer agents, their compensation the derivation of their compensation comes from the seller, comes from the seller's equity, right? So the listing agent would negotiate the fee, would collect the fee, and then at closing share that commission with a buyer's agent. So buyer agency and buyer agents have collected their fee with the derivation of the commission coming from the seller side. That's the way it's been.
Right. Well, now there's a lawsuit that contemplates over $13 billion of damages, hundreds of thousands of agents, and millions of transactions. And it covers the period from 2015 to 2020, and now the future.
Yeah.
So what's the point of that?
So let's talk about what the future might look like, and we can take a quick look back at the past. So the lawsuit, and I'm going to try to simplify it as best as I can. The lawsuit is first off, it's a class action lawsuit, which is different than other litigation that's been presented over the years. The class action is a group of sellers and seller groups and seller organizations have received from a judge. They made an argument that this is a practice that is done by the real estate industry that works to the detriment of all sellers. So a judge granted class action status, which allows other people with the same damages or perceptions to join together to move against a particular practice.
Right.
And remember, the practice that we're talking about here and the heart of the litigation is the practice of the listing agent collecting the buyer agent portion of the transaction. So the essence of the lawsuit is to break that apart. It's so in the event a seller wants to list their home and they choose to want to list with a listing agency, that listing agent will only be allowed to collect their portion of the transaction. So in an example of a 6% commission where a traditional agent would keep 3 of it and offer out 3 of it, that listing agent in essence would only be allowed to charge and collect 3%, their side of the equation, which means that the seller no longer has the financial responsibility to provide the compensation through the listing agent to the buyer's agent. So the seller, in essence, and part of the heart of the lawsuit, is that commissions, in theory, to sellers will drop organically.
Right.
And
I'm
let me
reading.
make one more comment. The essence of the lawsuit as well, and part of the reason they got this class action status and why it's gotten a lot of momentum, is the plaintiff in this lawsuit has alleged that the real estate community colludes with each other to keep this structure in place. And there is kind of, not that it's an antitrust lawsuit, but there's hints of that the collusion of this practice is keeping commission rates artificially high to sellers. So
Right.
that is what the essence of the lawsuit is. And if it succeeds, just simply from the plaintiff's position, one could make the argument, we never know how things are going to work out, that commissions paid by sellers in and of itself should be reduced based upon the fact that they no longer have to pay that other side of the compensation.
Right, overall. But I'm reading a bit from the lawsuit. It says, and that the plaintiffs accuse the defendants, which are NAR,
Yeah.
which we're members of, 1.5 million of us, and the 4 largest real estate enterprises, most
Yes.
of which you know, and many MLSs, accuses
Yeah.
them of, as you say, colluding, conspiring.
Yes.
It's a big word.
Yeah.
To require home sellers to pay the broker representing the buyer of their homes
Yes.
and to pay an inflated amount in violation of federal antitrust law, which is taken as seriously as you could take something.
Well, it's interesting. This morning, I always look at these Facebook memes. They always crack me up. And there's a lot of agents who put like comedic memes on their social media sites,
Sure.
complaining about the fact that they're only getting 1% as a buyer's agent, or the other agent isn't paying enough of the commission. And so we see just day to day that buyer agents try to inflict pressure on listing agents to pay more. It's not uncommon for a buyer's agent to call up a listing agent and say, hey, listen, I'm unhappy with that level of compensation. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with calling up and complaining about it. But, there is this subtle message that gets sent to listing agents who want to do this, and to say, listen, if you don't offer out enough compensation, I mean, this is what is even crazier, Scott, is many realtors are actually even unashamed to say, well, if you don't offer me enough compensation, I'm not bringing my buyer. And we all know in the code of ethics of the real estate business, it's right in the code of ethics.
You're not even hiding it.
The commission can play no role. If your buyer wants to see a property, the commission should play no role in your including the showing or excluding the showing based on commission. It would also be true if, a seller was offering out, or a realtor was offering out 9% to a buyer's agent, and a buyer wanted a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath colonial, and there was some igloo where 9% was being offered, and somehow the buyer's agent, pushed or forced or made it happen on the. So it works both ways. You don't see it on that way often, but the idea is that that's what's out there.
Scott, I want to say this. I never understood this question. If you're in New York State and you're a licensee, you're not in any board of realtors, which there are many. People don't know, lawyers especially.
Right.
There's a duty to cooperate. You don't have to pay. But why in the world would a state legislature put into the real property law that a licensee must do anything with anyone else? What other licenses do you get, whether it's a security company, a hairdresser, I know, auto mechanic. Why that perplexes me. Why would a licensee have to do anything with another licensee? That's
Okay,
just legislature.
I can give you what, in my view, I can give you the theory behind it. When it comes to housing, housing has a special place in our commerce because it's housing, and the state legislature, rightfully so, and many of the regulatory agencies are very concerned about blockbusting and redlining and doing things that could somehow prohibit home ownership. So this concept of cooperation, to some degree, I think is a good thing, right? Because we can't have people playing their own way inside of an industry. I mean, I think it could give the perception, and in many cases the reality, that if my agent doesn't have access or doesn't have cooperation, that could limit home ownership. So I think that that's the underlying current behind it. But I think the lines have gotten fuzzy with respect just to the industry. And I think somehow that I think the industry sometimes uses this cooperation feature or this thing like many times it's been abused. And remember, and you said it, this has nothing to do with cooperation. This has to do with compensation. Because the thing that we didn't finish talking about was, if the lawsuit succeeds, let's talk about buyer agents and how buyer agents are going to get paid. Buyer agents are going to get a new way of getting paid. The payment is going to come from the buyer, meaning that the person now who they represent, and again, this is the lawsuit succeeds, the person who they are representing, the person who they are fighting for, negotiating for, working for, that person will be the one to pay the buyer's agent. And when you think about it, Scott, it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, if the buyer is being represented by the buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent says with a lot of confidence, as your buyer's agent, I bring a lot of value. I have great solutions for you. I have great options. I have great strategies. You know what? Articulate your value to your buyer and charge it. Now, that makes a whole lot of common sense, that the one who's being represented should be the one who pays it. If you go to court, the plaintiff's attorney is paid by the plaintiff. The defendant's attorney is paid by the defendant. That's just the way it works. And that's kind of the way it's going to work in the real estate space. The concern is, and why everybody's so nervous, other than the fact it's change and nobody likes change, is you got a lot of buyer agents out there who are worried if they're going to be able to articulate their value to the buyer. That's problem number one for buyer agents. But here's the other real problem that everyone's worried about. And I don't like to use the word worried. I always think there's an opportunity in everything. The way the industry has evolved, and you had used this kind of meteoric thing happening and kind of the archaic way it's been, but we have what we call ultimate transparency in the business. And the practice of buyers going directly to listing agents, because it is so much of a listing business. This is a listing business that all the top producers are listing agents, all the team leaders are listing agents. Listings has always been where the money is. However, today, and it's been that way for a while, the buyer is completely comfortable going to the listing agent directly. Because there's ultimate transparency, there's no secrets, everybody knows where the property is and how to get a hold of the listing agent. Buyers have become comfortable going directly to the listing agent and bypassing the buyer's agent. Now, what's so interesting, Scott, in the business, and this is what's so crazy, you talk to buyer, when I talk about this, everybody gets crazy and everybody gets all worked up. And buyer agents will often say in the meetings that I do, they'll say, this is a bad thing because, it's not good for the listing agent to work both sides, right? They'll say they don't really have real representation. If the listing agent is representing both the seller and the buyer, that's bad because nobody's representing the buyer. And the seller is on both sides. It's a conflict. This is what you hear. And we can tell you this, that there is certainly the optics of a conflict. However, if the industry is an ethical industry, and if you have an ethical listing agent, they can successfully manage both sides of the transaction. Just because you represent both doesn't mean you are working against. And there are lots and lots, and I think the majority of realtors are ethical. And there are many, many agents who would complain about this new law as a buyer's agent, but yet if they got a listing and they were fortunate enough to get the buyer to come to them directly, they would love it because there is a revenue opportunity there. So the idea is, it's just the evolution, and so the worry is buyers agents are going to be, and I would tell you, Scott, I think buyer agents should be concerned. Don't be concerned about the change. Be concerned about developing the skills on how to articulate your value, and come up with a method to keep a buyer in your orbit because they see it as a benefit.
Okay, but hold on a sec, Scott. I'll be the other side of this. A lot of these agents count, if not all, count on that offer of compensation as their income. That's what they
Right.
think it is. I'm getting this. I don't need more. If it's 2.5, they set their sights on that, and they've never had to say what they need because it's been provided for them. Rare is the case that they say, I need 3, and if they pay 2, you owe me 1. It's spoken about, but rarely does that happen.
Well, you bring up a
Also,
good point, not to interrupt you. Many buyers don't even really know the compensation that the buyer's agent is going to be getting.
I
So
know,
it's
right?
been, not only has it been a good number in many cases because your listing agent is negotiating your fee for you, but many buyers the buyers really don't see it as they're paying, even though one can make the argument they are. It's
Well, they're
being paid
funding
for at
the,
the
the
price.
entire purchase, but there's
Correct.
3 things about that. I know of another suit where if you get in some agent's car like the old days and you're buying a $300,000 house, you don't know that the agent, if there's 3% offered out, is making 9,000. So number one, you don't know that. Number two, you don't know that since you're putting 10% on the house, you're only putting $900 down on the agent's commission. So you're financing $8,100 over 30 years.
Mhm.
Lastly, you don't know. No one gives you the option. Hey, Scott, that 8,100 that you're financing, you could pay it today, like it's a title bill or a legal fee. So to
Mhm.
avoid financing that 8,100 to become 14,000 in 30 years. So
Right.
they're flying completely blind with regard to the fact that they're funding the loan, and no one thinks of that they're funding with a loan to value the buyer's agent's commission, which is even more crazy.
It's true. It's part of the transaction. It's become an accepted norm. In fact, sometimes when I have these meetings, a lot of agents will say, "Well, why does it matter?" If this is the way a lot of agents, which we can talk about in a minute, they go, "Oh, I don't really think this is going to be a problem, Scott, because all we need to do is raise the price, and then I can get the difference. If the seller wants 400,000, let's raise it to 415. I'll get the 15. The seller will get his 400, and everyone will be happy." First off, if the lawsuit succeeds, you won't even be able to do that because you can't even get your commission funneled through. So forget that as even an option. But let's even say it was an option. You know what a lot of sellers are saying? They're saying, wait a minute.
If it's
So you want me
415, I
to,
want it, right?
I
That's
want the 415. Well, if my
right.
house appraises for
And I
415,
want
why should I
415.
give you 15,000 on my 415? That's my money, not yours.
Right.
So
Right.
it's become almost accepted that this equity that is built in. I think I was figuring it out the other day that I think that in a typical year, Scott, that commissions, just real estate commissions, based upon the amount of transactions that close per year, average sales prices, and let's talk about a commission rate of, let's just call it 5%. I think it's somewhere around $60 billion of equity is being provided via commissions. So there's $60 billion of seller equity that's going towards real estate commissions.
Yep. That's
That's a lot of
crazy.
money, so things are changing.
Things are changing. You know what? I always thought of this back in the meltdown, just to touch on this one brief second, how much of buyer's commission was buried in the mortgage foreclosure landfill. So they represent a buyer, the house gets foreclosed on. That could be part of a deficiency judgment or 1099 that the buyer has no idea. Think about
Mhm.
that. Every house that goes foreclosed on, let's say had a realtor, whatever money was buried and was never paid,
Yeah,
part of that was realtor commission.
yeah. Listen, I would even give you something else to think about when it comes to commissions. The one thing that the real estate industry has been really successful at doing is convincing sellers that the commission that they're paying is only 3, 4, or 5 or 6%, whatever it is. And we know all commissions are negotiable. The fact of the matter is, you're calculating the commission amount based upon the sales price. But there is another way to calculate a commission. I say calculate the commission as a percentage of equity.
Ooh.
Now, when you take a commission of, let's just say 6%, and you calculate that amount on the seller's equity. So let's say they paid, remember, in theory, that seller who was once a buyer, in essence, paid for that commission when they bought the house. Now, let's say the property has gone up $100,000 of equity, appreciation. So they put down $50,000. It's now up to $150,000. The house is now worth $500,000. It was worth, $400,000 when they bought it. They put down $50,000. So there's $150,000 of equity. 5% on $500,000 is $25,000. What is a percentage of $25,000 on $150,000 of equity? It's not 5%.
No, it's was it 25? It's 25.
25,000 on $150,000 of equity. We're nearing 20%. 20% would be 30 grand. So we're at 20+% commit. So there is another, when you look at commissions as a percentage of a seller's equity, the numbers are much, much more significant. And this is where things have, but the industry's been successful at keeping this commission rate as a calculation of sales price.
Okay, so now it's 2025, and the 2020-21 values are a thing of the past.
Right.
People are not, I think, going to find appreciation when it's 2024, 2025. There'll be an election. Who knows what happens thereafter? You're going to find people are very, very skinny. They may not have made any money in 2024, 2025.
You mean on equity appreciation?
Yes.
Listen, Scott, the one thing I've learned about economists and forecasting, I've learned that economists and forecasters are usually one step above or one step below a weatherman. They're right about half the time. So I don't know. I can give you a well thought out answer. I mean, I've got, certainly friends I know in the industry who are really good at forecasting, and they have and sometimes great forecasters, what they're really good at? That no matter what happens, they sound right. I know certain people that are like economically minded individuals who tell you what's going to happen, and they have a great way of delivering their answer that no matter what happens, it seems like they were right. So I really don't know. I mean, I have a guess just like you. I mean, my only concern and my guess, and I don't know if this isn't a forecast. I'm just saying that because what we're seeing right now of these high interest rates that are right now, as we speak today, somewhere around 7% and slightly higher. I mean, we're doing this on, May 25th of 2023, and that's where rates are landing today. The problem with our business right now, and I shouldn't say problem. I think the opportunity is, but the issue is that you've got a lot of people who just can't put their house on the market because they can't leave their 2.5% and 3% interest rate to go into a 7% rate. There's just not enough listings. So I don't think it's overly complicated. There just doesn't seem to be that there's going to be enough houses available to buy, but yet home ownership and people who want and need to buy are going to continue to produce themselves. I mean, home ownership is a function of population growth. And until people stop having children, okay, and stop growing, which I don't see happening anytime soon, people are still having kids and growing, the need for housing is going to be there, both in the rental and the home ownership market. So I'm not convinced that home prices are going to collapse or decline. I think they're going to continue to rise simply just based on the demand and supply issue that we learned in 9th grade.
Well, you hear from back to the commission issue, you hear, to me, I think it's nonsensical statements because it's completely unique to real estate. They say, well, if you make the buyers pay, they can't pay for it. They actually say that, so that means my service is valueless. They can't pay what I want to make. And even in this article, one of the lawyers for the defendant said, well, it's going to be harder for buyers to buy. But
again, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm saying, think of that statement. If the stake is too much money, we got to have free stake then.
Again, the architecture of being able to buy a house, nothing's changing. Remember, when a buyer goes on Zillow or Trulia or Realtor.com and they start searching, They have the same access to that property as they've always had. Nothing's going to change. And so now when that buyer, let's just say, goes directly to the listing agent, I mean, I'm sure a listing agent will somehow be able to absorb compensation into that equation somewhere. But the theory is that it's going to be a lower cost to the buyer, and we know a lower cost to the seller. Now, let's just say the buyer agent, who now is going to have to collect their commission directly from a buyer. Let's say that inevitability happens. Well, I think it's like all things, if that's just the way it becomes, and the buyers have to go into their pocket, and it's now another closing cost that they have to deal with, and it's another cost that gets absorbed into the equation. If we look in history, over every business that it's added fees and added this, and it's like the big thing now with credit cards. When you go to the store now, you pay the
3%.
service charge, and I don't know. People just kind of get used to things, and I don't really think. I mean, they say it's going to hurt buyers. I mean, again, now we're kind of forecasting. I don't really know, but I know that the buyer's still going to have access to the property just like they've had right now. The only thing that's going to change is the compensation. And remember, the opportunity for buyers agents and the challenge for buyers agents is they're going to have to be pretty good at figuring out their value-added proposition to earn their compensation.
That's like saying, we're finished the Christmas holidays. Now it's time to get in shape. And they were just doing the opposite several days ago.
Yeah.
So,
and the other thing about the industry, Scott, is that the majority of the 1.5 million realtors, like you stated, the overwhelming majority are buyer agents. There's not a lot of listing agents, pure listing agents. I mean, you could be an agent, you get a couple of listings a year, but the pure listing agents, it's a very small group.
So if we could pin any blame, I think you may be unwilling to do that, but if you could pin blame on this, couldn't it be on the brokers not making the realtors, the agents, clearly able to demonstrate their value? They're relying on compensation offered, and the buyers don't even reach the agent. They reach Zillow, which means the agent. And these agents are tripping over chairs to get to the Zillow phone call. They didn't acquire the client. They don't know the client. They don't know the house. They don't know the seller, and they're basically inheriting a deal.
Yeah. Well, I don't blame the realtor for the broker for the lawsuit. That's a separate thing.
No. I mean,
I'm going to say, but you said you don't know if I want to go there. I'll absolutely go there. I blame everything on the broker. Everything. Everything good, I blame the broker, and everything bad, I blame the broker. The broker-agent relationship, it's a very dysfunctional relationship in many cases. Brokers are often intimidated by their agents. One of the issues with the real estate industry is the insatiable appetite to recruit. The recruiting of agents has become the business of many real estate companies. That's all they think about is recruiting. They don't really think much about retention, but they think a lot about recruiting. And it's always part of there's business, almost every business model out there, lots of business models out there. It's all about who can you bring in? It's this insatiable appetite to just bring people into this business. Even though we know that the failure rates have never changed and still don't change, and some would argue they're even higher than ever before. So I think the blame of bad real estate practices is absolutely lays at the doorstep of the broker. I think that the industry, and we can certainly be critical of the industry and of itself. I mean, the National Association of Realtors does a lot of wonderful things, but there's a lot of dissension and a lot of frustration on the part of the members on what value am I getting, and that conversation is always ongoing. And I believe that a lot of the leadership at the NAR is starting to look at that. And you always got to look at what your customers are saying, right? I mean, as soon as you start ignoring your clients and your customers, that's a problem. And the customers of the NAR, the clients of the NAR, are the real estate population. So, we have to look at that. So, but I do think that the boots on the ground practice, and whenever I meet a bad agent or an agent that's sloppy or late or doesn't return phone calls or doesn't do a great job or doesn't make enough money, it's to me, it's always the fault of the broker. Now, again, this dysfunctional relationship, because a lot of brokers, it's the independent contractor argument. They're an independent contractor. I can't tell them what to do. They're an independent. That is the worst argument I've ever heard. As a broker owner, you can absolutely put guardrails in to make your agents successful. And if they're not successful, you don't have to keep them. So the idea is that I find that the top brokers, the top companies, they are recalibrating their relationship between their agents and themselves. They're bringing in more accountability. They're setting guardrails. They're putting systems in place to ensure the quality of the experience for the consumer. And that's the disconnect. A lot of brokers, they don't even know what's happening on the consumer level with even in their own organization. They just know what's going on with their agents, right? They don't know what's going on with the public. So I think that that's where the dysfunctional breakdown is. And believe me, I'm the last person that's shy in talking about it. My broker clients, whenever I come in, I mean, they're sweating bullets because I'm going to bring the perspective that I bring in, and I like to talk in a way that they're not used to hearing, and the agents like it. So so to answer your question, 100%.
Wow, I like that. I like that because I mean it's almost throwing these agents to the wolves where they're not trained,
no.
and then now someone comes, hey Scott, I'd like this house, and sure, Scott the buyer, here's my commission bill, here's my retainer, here's what I'll provide, and say, wait a minute, the house is I'm going to pay 12,000. None of my friends paid 3% or 400,000. No one paid 12,000. And my closing costs. So this is a new closing cost. My lawyer said that he's never heard of this, right, in New York.
I mean, Scott, listen, I'm in a real estate office almost every day. I speak to literally, I'm in front of hundreds, if not thousands of agents every week. And it is still a mystery to me. It's a shocker that I'm in front of rooms and I speak to even seasoned veteran agents, and I'll try to get into, let's say, a commission conversation with them. I go, tell me how you deliver your commission to your sellers. And they'll tell me. And then I'll give them the rebuttal. And they collapse. They don't even know how to handle commission conversations or pricing conversations. In fact, the two things that most agents are completely terrified of at a listing appointment is when they talk to the sellers about commission and price. It's like a surgeon who thinks they're a great surgeon, except when it comes to blood and incisions. You can't have it. And the reason why agents are scared and fearful is they are just not trained properly. There's no accountability. There's no expertise. They never practice their listing presentation. You know when they practice it? They practice it on the client the 7 times a year they're in front of them. There's no critiquing. And again, because brokers, and it's true, most brokers, not all, they're afraid of their agents leaving. They're constantly afraid that if they put too much pressure on them, they're going to quit and go work somewhere else. So therefore, they accept mediocrity. They accept, this below average way of service, and it just moves on. So that's the observation. But I got to tell you, there are brokers out there, and I love them, who really, really treat their agents almost like employees. They have demands and guardrails and all things that are completely legally compliant. And you know something? These are the agents that are the performers. These are the agents that give a much better service experience to their clients, as they should. And it's just, in fact, the agents that get the most pressure from their broker actually feel more of a connection to their broker.
Sure.
That's actually what keeps them there. And the broker that does that doesn't really have to worry about agents running away for another 1% higher in split, because they're bringing something to the relationship that's of value. As I often say, agents often don't bring much real special value to their clients. They just kind of do what they're supposed to do. They do all the stuff that people expect. One can make the argument that the broker isn't really bringing value to their agents. Now, a lot of brokers feel, hey, I'm there for my agents if they need me. I'm there if there's a problem. All those things are what I call value expect. That's what an agent expects of your broker. The question that brokers have to ask is, what are they bringing to their agents that the agents don't expect? What is their value added benefit of working there? And you ask a lot of brokers, and they don't really have an answer other than all the things that are expected to be delivered. I mean, simply saying, the reason why somebody should work in my company is because I am there for my agents. I got their back. I'm going to fight for them. That's what they need from me. Or we have a family environment. I mean, all these things that are nice. but it's not value add. It's kind of what you should have, you know? So
Mhm.
that's the question. Push
So,
your
so
agents
we are
hard.
now at a point where should this matter be resolved in favor of the plaintiffs or even some form of a settlement, I think
Yeah,
there's going to be some form of settlement because it'll be tough
right.
to really change a national industry. So, I mean, would it be disclosure? Or in any case, we're going to have agents explain why they should be paid outside of the seller's offer of compensation or in addition to.
Right.
What do
Well,
you say?
I think, listen, if the lawsuit goes through and it all, whether it settles out or is, you know, the verdict is, you know, the I think that a buyer agent will have to completely recalibrate what their value proposition is to a buyer, you know, and there are things that they can do, you know, for example, they can bring a different level of financial literacy into the equation with their buyer. They can develop some interesting and some unique negotiating strategies that could be of benefit to them. They can provide even some additional services, different ways in which they can do some preliminary research on the property before negotiations begin by revealing certain title issues that might be apparent on the property, different circumstances where they might be able to identify certain seller motivation. I mean, there is a list of things that I can certainly share with, you know, clients that I do on things that they can do to kind of bring more value into that relationship.
Well, I think
Um,
the quick, let me ask you this. To me, the simplest, easiest answer, if someone asked me if this happens and I never spoke to you, never heard of you, I would just say simply become a negotiator or a better negotiator. My chief knock on the industry is I say, and no one's ever answered me, why can agents negotiate? Not why can't they, but I'd say why. You get to finish the test, you join an office, there's no training or experience in negotiation. There's never been a
right,
union representative. So
right.
what makes the retired school teacher, what makes the entrepreneur have any negotiation?
It's
So
a fair argument. I mean, we call ourselves negotiator, but nobody's ever. When I say to agents, I'll often say, "I go, what's your negotiating strategy?"
they don't have one.
There's no, or I'll give you the answer. I hear, well, I like to create win-win situations or something. I mean, I hear answers. I don't hear any strategies. I don't hear
Right.
any methods, and
And
there are
and
methods.
no, there's
But
nothing.
the
But
idea is if you're not trained in them, you don't talk about it. It's just let's throw it against. Let's make an offer, and let's hope we win. You know, and
I understand.
we'll nudge the other agent till they're ready to, you know, go crazy. I'll call them 1,000 times. That's my strategy. So
Right. Okay.
you're
But
right.
negotiation is a separate discipline. There are
Skill,
institutionals,
discipline,
organizations.
absolutely,
There's
of course.
with I've never flown a plane. There's got to be some training and experience required to fly a plane. There has to be.
You would
I've
think
never
so.
fixed a dishwasher. I've never
Yeah,
programmed a computer.
yeah.
So how can these people who have nearly no qualification negotiate? That's what I would say. How could we now tell the person to pay us? Well, tell you what, if you pay me, you won't pay full price. That to me is the easiest way to say you could pay the seller or you
I
could
would
pay
make the argument, Scott, that there's no way you can really probably say that. I don't think it's about the price. It's about the value you're getting for the services you're providing that isn't necessarily linked to price, right? Could be one way. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the reality is that the industry, and I think, you know, clever agents and hopefully clever trainers and strategists like myself will develop, you know, good ways in which to do that. I would tell you this, and I would go as far as saying that, you know, you know, as clever as I think I am, and believe me, I'm my number one fan. I think it's a tough sell. I think buyers are getting smart. They're smart already. They're only getting smarter. And I think buyers are going to start to think about, you know, what is the value that my buyer agent is really bringing to me? And hey, if I can go to a listing agent who is ethical and is morally proper, you know, can I get the same experience? Can I get a similar experience from that? And by the way, there is an advantage, and no one ever likes to talk about this. We always like to talk about the conflict of interest, which, if you're an ethical agent, you can navigate that. It's not easy, but it can be navigated. But the one thing about one singular agent handling the transaction is, I got to tell you, the communication problems are often minimized, right? Because
Mhm.
now if I'm a listing agent. I don't have to communicate through a buyer's agent and deal with the buyer's and agent's interpretation. We know exactly where things are. And a lot of we can calibrate what's happening. You have a direct contact with the buyer. So the argument in favor of it is it's kind of in theory should be, while it's harder in some ways, you're not waiting for the buyer agent to return your phone call on wanting to know the status of the buyer's mortgage conditions.
Right.
Or waiting to hear from the buyer's agent to find out when the inspection is going to be rescheduled for. All of these things can be handled on a singular basis. So that's the positive side of the equation, which we have to look at as well. So I think that, I think it's going to be a hard sell getting buyers to pay that commission directly. I don't think it's impossible. There will be ways, there will be buyers who want to do it that way. But I think that the opportunity for agents and brokers is to think about your listing acquisition strategy as a company. Most don't even have one. You need to get one. And by the way, we all know that the one thing most brokers will even admit of their entire agent population is the agents don't prospect enough anyway. I mean, that's the world I'm in. And I can tell you, it's still a shocker. Most people don't go after FSBOs and expireds and short sales and absentee owners and homeowners with any consistency or with any ingenuity. And you know what? That's the path to more revenue and control of your career.
So we're really going to maybe just see if this happens and then see what the individual companies or entities decide to do in response to it.
I think, Scott, that if the lawsuit succeeds, we certainly know things are going to change. But I have another view. Even if the lawsuit fails, I think things are changing. I mean, buyers, whether or not the lawsuit is there or not, are just more often than ever going directly to listing agents. They just like it. I mean, especially in a limited inventory environment. What am I going to do? I'm going to be one of 27 offers on that one property, or you know what? Let me go to the listing agent directly, and I don't even have to worry about, my buyer's agent getting through. And just another point on the buyer agent, listing agent relationship. And let me ask you a question, because you're an agent. Scott, do you think it's a benefit? Let's say I'm a buyer and I'm dealing with you. You're my buyer's agent, and you have a really excellent relationship with the listing agent. Would that benefit me as a buyer? Just the fact that you have an excellent relationship with that listing agent.
Of course.
Of course, correct? And it would be good because the other agent knows you, trusts you, maybe have done deals with you, know that when Scott says something, it comes out of his mouth, it's going to happen. That's a benefit to me as a buyer, correct?
Of course.
Let me ask you another question. What if you have a bad relationship with the listing agent?
That's going to hurt.
What if you don't have a wonderful relationship with
That's going to hurt.
It's going to hurt. Now, I'm a buyer, and I don't know you. I came from a lead somewhere. You know what? I don't really want to take the chance of knowing whether you have a good relationship or a bad relationship with the listing agent. Here's what I know. If I go to the listing agent directly, I don't got to worry about it, correct? Sure. I don't need to worry whether or not you're friends with that agent or not, whether you have a relationship with them or not.
Good point.
Let me go direct. Let me take that out of the equation. So that's another reality that I think, regardless of the lawsuit, I think buyers, especially coming through COVID, I mean, a lot of buyers had their friendly best friend who's a real estate agent helped them find a house and represented them in offers, and they lost offer after offer after offer. Not because of the agent, but because maybe their offer wasn't just good enough. And a lot of these buyers are like, listen, what's the benefit of you? I mean, gosh, I mean, you're my friend. You're my referred person. How come you couldn't get me the house? Whether they're right or whether they're wrong, and they're probably wrong, they still feel and perceive.
And what if there is this? You're talking about all the times where 27 offers were rejected. What about when you were told you got to go over asking, you got to waive appraisal, you got to waive inspection? So why did I need you? I just got killed in this. I gave up everything and I got the house. Big deal. I paid the most money. What did you do for me? And on top of that, the most money I paid for you to allow me to pay the most money.
Listen, I think that to really dissect what is a real estate agent's value, I mean, that's a whole conversation of itself. And if a realtor is very good at fixing a problem or working it through or taking somebody through the emotional journey of the issue at hand, I mean, it's like, it's like, how do you justify a surgeon's fee? I mean, surgery can go perfect, but it was that one thing that could have kind of gone wrong because he had experience, knew how to deal with it. And, it's sometimes very hard to dichotomize the value of what we do. But, you're right in many respects. I mean, when somebody buys a house in most states, they're not doing it all by themselves with just their realtor. They've got lawyers and title companies and
Banks.
mortgage companies, and there's a lot of eyeballs on a transaction. And the argument is certainly out there is, what is it you're really doing at the end of the day, especially whether it's a buyer's agent or a listing agent. Often when it comes under contract, they throw up their hands and they move on, right?
Yes,
I mean, they're gone. Now, again, remember that buyer's agent who puts the deal under contract and then it evaporates, never hear from them again. You do hear from them one more time. You know when they show up?
Closing commission.
There you go. And they get their check in full, regardless of the experience. There's no who does the buyer even negotiate with, right? It's done. And you know how many listing agents complain about the fact that the buyer's agent was missing in action?
All of them.
But they still have to pay that 2.5%, 3% commission at the table.
To your point, which I've always wondered this, and I've spoken on this, when we when you say how easy it is for the individual buyer to go to the listing agent, let's say I'm a seller and I pick Scott Einbinder as my listing agent. I got top pro. He knows everything. He knows the right people. It's going to all work. And then some clown is 3 days in the business, answers the Zillow lead. I'm the seller. You're my broker. Now this great team of lenders and title and inspectors, everyone's involved, but we're all dependent. It's like me batting fourth for the New York Yankees. Scott, get in there. It's going to be weak, right? You're adding a weak player to this team. And now we're waiting for that buyer's agent who's brand new, doesn't know about a septic tank, doesn't know about a mortgage contingency clause, doesn't know about a TRID or setting anyone up for a moving truck even.
So what's the question?
We are now stuck with that weak link.
Well, here's the thing. First off, it goes back, if there's a weak listing agent who gets a listing, if they're weak, I think that's the broker's responsibility. But again, here's my view of things. If, let's say, Scott goes in for that listing appointment and doesn't get it, and the brand new agent with no experience at a lower commission gets the listing, that's my fault. You see, my attitude is the other agent didn't win the listing. It means that I, as a top performer, lost the listing. I may have not identified all the things. I may not have educated the seller in a particular way. So I have an attitude, and I may not be the right guy to ask your question to. I believe that when you win a listing, it's all you. I believe that when you lose a listing, it's all you. Okay, you can't make reasons. We don't lose listings because of commissions. We don't lose listings because of price. We lose listings because we were unable to convince the seller of our value for them to want to hire you. I believe that's the only reason a loss is there. So, but to your point, which I think you're making, is, what does a seller do when they hire an inexperienced agent? It's like anything else. It's like when somebody goes and buys a used car online with no vetting, and when anybody tries to either get a better deal, sometimes they win, but in certain things in life, I think with brain surgery and legal defense and tax advice and selling houses, I think there's certain things where you want to kind of reach for the best and brightest. And it doesn't mean a new agent can't provide a great experience. There's a lot of new agents who have become very successful. I've worked with a lot of brand new people who are now number one in their market, but they didn't do it alone. They always incorporated their broker into their situation. I don't want to say his name, but there was an agent who put a video out, and he said the number one reason why he was successful is because of all the mentors and coaches that he hired when he was brand new to the business. He was always, every quarter, he would hire another coach, another mentor, and he invested thousands and thousands of dollars. Well, that's the anomaly, right? And so a new person who gets it right, who is career minded, I think that they can do a good job for their seller.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's how they articulate the value of their track record and what they bring and what the degree of
Right.
diligence and maybe
That's
their
right.
staff. I hear that.
Yeah.
So we are in for an evolution, I guess, Scott. I mean, I guess stay tuned.
I think it's here no matter what. I think it's already evolving. I think that everyone's sitting around waiting for this lawsuit, hoping and praying that it's not going to go through. I don't think that that's where you should be spending your time. Start spending your time on recalibrating your value-added benefit to clients, your value-added benefit to sellers, your value-added benefit to buyers. And by the way, if at the end of the day, your value-added benefit in your own mind is nothing more than a duplication of what all other agents do, you have no value-added benefit, okay? You got to really bring something different to the table. And that's really where, my business has been so explosive over the past, 10 years is because, and I'm still shocked. It still is a marvel to me on how many brokers and agents, all with very nice reputations, are still just kind of antiquated in their thinking. And in fact, the one thing I always notice is that whenever I start going down this path with broker owners or agents, I can see like the hair on the neck start to stand up. They kind of get defensive. They don't like it. That actually is a very big signal because it means that you're doubting your own situation. And so, guys like me hopefully are coming along in your universe to give you a perspective. Listen, I'm in every market. I bounce around every day. Those who follow me on social media, you see it. Scott, you see it. I'm in an office every day. I'm somewhere every day. I know the way it is. I mean, people say to me, I often hear, they'll say, oh, Scott, here in Brooklyn, real estate is done like nobody else. Or here in Nashville, or here in Miami. Everyone says where they are, they think it's unique and different. I'm going to tell you, I'm everywhere. There is no difference. It's all the same. And by the way, the people who tell you that it's unique here than anywhere else, they've never been anywhere else to even know that. So I'm telling you that it is all the same pressures, all the same issues. Buyers and sellers are all the same. There's little methodology tweaks in markets, but by and large, it's all the same when it comes to sales. Get real, get a real, go to people, surround yourself with people who are going to challenge you as a broker, owner, or agent. You don't need someone to tell you all the things you're doing right. You need to tell all the things that, and I don't like to say doing wrong, but can be improved upon, that can be done so much better. And, the one, and we'll leave it off at this, Scott, because I'm in the training arena and I am just absolutely blown away by the training arena. How, what are we training these agents on? There's so little training on progressive selling techniques. It almost doesn't exist. I mean, I go into offices, I don't get it. So you got to really get aggressive, challenge your agents, challenge yourself, challenge the people around you, find mentors and find people around you who are going to dissect what you do and who have the bandwidth of understanding to know what's out there. So that's the advice that I would give anybody, especially with the lawsuit.
I think that's great advice. And I think that really we have to reach those people that want to do better because we are going to have a changing future landscape. And look how much real estate changed from 21 to 22 with the rates and the inventory. I mean, that was a shock to the system right there.
I know. I laugh when I hear agents and I see them all the time. They're like crying, there's no inventory. There's no inventory. And you know what my answer is? Well, what are you doing to change that? How many hours did you spend the last 12 hours going out and finding inventory, going out and creating opportunity for yourself? And you get a big kind of stare. So there's listings out there. You just have to go. They're not going to come to you. You got to go to them, and that's the major shift in the business. The big producers get this. And believe me, the big producers aren't giving away all their best secrets. They know they have to go out there and prospect. They have to go out there and create it. They have to go out there and create the client, not wait for the client. The good news is that's a small universe, which has got lots of room for more people. So I think it's never been a better time.
I really appreciate you appearing today. We're going to get this to the right people.